Imagine a man who for a long time could not even read his own name. He smelled of metal, cheap tobacco, and the sewage of Bradford. An ordinary plumber, one of millions of Victorian workers doomed to complete obscurity. And yet, he was the very man God chose to rewrite the history of 20th century Christian faith. When he laid his rough hands on the sick, cancerous tumors disappeared, the blind began to see, and the deaf began to hear. There are at least 14 recorded cases in which, through his prayer, life returned to bodies that had already grown cold. Death simply could not stand against his faith. He shook entire continents. Australia and New Zealand experienced a true spiritual earthquake as thousands fell to the ground under the weight of God's presence. They called him the Apostle of Faith because for him, the word impossible sounded like a personal insult to God. But behind every resurrection stood a quiet breaking, and behind every triumph stood a poor childhood in Yorkshire and 12-hour shifts in the factory. How did an illiterate laborer become the apostle of faith? How did God forge this rough iron? Let us begin at the beginning. Menston, Yorkshire. The year 1859. In a small stone village, under the long shadow of industrial England, Smith Wigglesworth was born into poverty. This was not the England of power and triumph that people like to celebrate. This was the England of smoke, cold mornings, wet earth, and homes that lived close to hunger. He was not born into influence, education, or comfort. He was born into a poor Yorkshire family where survival came before ease and endurance came before dreams. His father worked to exhaustion. His mother held the home together as best she could. It was a life of little money, little rest, and constant pressure. Smith barely had time to be a child. At 6 years old, he was sent into the fields to pull turnips from wet and freezing ground. At 7, life grew even harder. He entered the wool mill. From 6 in the morning until 6 at night, his days were shaped by noise, dust, weight, and exhaustion. Some mornings began around 5. A hurried bite of food, then a cold walk to the mill before daylight. And when Smith asked how long the day would feel, his father answered with the hard wisdom of poverty.
Night always comes to those who work, my lad.
Night always comes to those who work. It was not cruelty. It was the tenderness of a father who had no easier world to give his son. Before he had learned much of the world, he had already learned hardship. School passed him by, books passed him by, letters passed him by. He grew up an illiterate boy, caught in the demands of life before he ever had the chance to learn. And yet, in that harsh beginning, something was being formed in him. The pressure did not destroy him, it forged him. In the fields and in the mill, an iron endurance was being hammered into his soul. In that house, survival always spoke first. Work, bread, weariness. The pressure to make it through another day. His father carried that weight heavily. And yet, beneath the noise of labor and need, another hunger was already speaking in the boy. But poverty was not the only force shaping his early life. There was another influence, quieter but deeper. His grandmother was an old Wesleyan, a woman of prayer. And whenever she could, she took the boy with her to meetings. Later, Smith would say that he could not remember a time when he had not hungered for God. While the world was training his hands for labor, God was already awakening his heart to seek. While smoke and struggle marked the world around him, another fire was beginning to burn within him. Long before the crowds, long before the miracles, long before the world would call him the apostle of faith, the forging had already begun. And in the hidden poverty of Yorkshire, the first fire was already being lit. Smith is 8. He still carries factory wool on his clothes and wet earth on his boots. He is still a child of the mill and the fields. But this time, his grandmother is not simply taking him to chapel. She is leading him into a room that will change him forever. The meeting is crowded with working people, rough hands, worn coats, faces shaped by labor. An old stove stands in the middle of the room, and they sing. Not for beauty, not for show. They sing of the Lamb of God as if their lives depend on it. Later, Smith would remember it well. They even moved around that stove with joy, their faces shining as if heaven had come near. And then it happens. For the boy, the room falls away. The voices fade. One truth comes near. Jesus did not die only for the world. He died for him, for this poor boy, for this little worker, for Smith. Right there, in the middle of that singing, something opens in him that will never close again. This is the new birth, an inward break after which a soul does not remain the same. From that day on, he would never again doubt that he belonged to Christ. He comes home looking like the same boy, the same patched clothes, the same poverty, the same narrow house. But inwardly, he is no longer the same. Now there is fire in him, and the first one touched by that fire is his mother. The first soul God gives him is his own mother. What was lit in that meeting did not stay in the chapel. It entered his home. Then his father saw it. He saw the fire in the boy. He saw the change in his wife, and he knew that something had entered that house which he could not explain. So this hard-working laborer, still far from true new birth himself, began taking the whole family to church. And the house that had known only need and hard labor began to draw near to God. He is not yet the apostle of faith. He is only an 8-year-old boy who almost has nothing, and yet already carries within him something that will one day shake thousands. A catcher of souls is already waking in him. Later, his mother would ask, "Were you speaking to that man about his soul again?" And it would be true. Even as a boy, he could not keep silent about Christ. From that day on, something was switched on in Smith that would never switch off again. A hunger for souls, an inward certainty, an iron seriousness toward God. He does not yet know that his name will one day become a legend, but heaven already knows. Because it was here, in a crowded little chapel, among the songs of ordinary people, that more than the conversion of a boy began. Here began the birth of the man the world would later call the Apostle of Faith.